Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car, your truck, or on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about just how committed a Western government, and in this case the British government, was to improving the standard of living of British citizens. And I'll use the period sort of the late 1950s into the early mid 1960s. This was, this is the government of Harold Macmillan around that time. But this is something, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. This is something that's interesting, because when you read the history of the day, the sort of things that Macmillan and the British government ministers were writing about at the time, and the public proclamations, the stuff in the newspapers. Remember, the newspapers weren't globalist controlled in those days, so they were, all these newspapers were vying to be first to print with breaking news, and they all wanted to be a journal of record. That is, if they printed it, it was 100% factual and reliable. They may have an editorial page which could go off on all sorts of tangents, but in terms of the announcements that they made, they all wanted to be a journal of record. So a very different news and information landscape at the time. But looking at the memoirs of Harold Macmillan and again the ministers and the people around him, and the cabinet meetings, the sort of things they were talking about, the policy prescriptions they were considering, the way they were measuring the effects of policies that they enacted, it comes through loud and clear that their primary commitment, or certainly among their top 2 or 3 commitments, was to improve the standard of living of the British citizens. Now, this is quite the opposite of what it is today. In fact, it's almost chalk and cheese. So Harold Macmillan was writing about how the various methods they used. So when he came to government, or came to the prime ministership, he'd had experience in government previously. He had this very determined, as did some of the people around, they were very determined, we're going to enact policies that are going to make lives better for the British people, are going to improve their standard of living. Now, sometimes it can be patchy, these things. For example, they can discover some remote part of Britain where the people don't have on-tap running water, or they don't have, electricity or something. And you sort of, we'll fix that. But that means the benefit isn't shared equally. For example, if people already got electricity, nothing improves for them, but it does improve for those people up in the back corner there. So there can be different sorts of things and policy prescriptions, and they raise things like this. X amount of people don't have running water, in the remote rural areas, or don't have electricity, and they want to address that. So those things were in there. But the idea to improve everyone's standard of living. Now, the standard of living you can look at it various ways. It can be that the roads are better, wider, so it doesn't take so long to get to work, or the public transport is improved so that there's not just one train or one bus to get you to work. You've got other, or to get you to the shops and so on. So it can be public transport, access to health care. If you can be sick, if you're going to be sick, then that's going to affect your quality of life. But if you've got access to health care, which will make you better, then your quality of life improves. The price of food. So the cost of living was also a big part of that. The price of food, how much of the weekly budget was taken up buying, a loaf of bread or milk or something. How much of the budget was taken up in could you afford to buy a house? Could you afford to rent? Or those type. All of that came into it. Now, Macmillan was interesting because he goes through the various policy prescriptions he tried as a minister and then as prime minister, and the policy prescriptions that he's observed being tried that he thought hadn't worked or hadn't worked well enough, or if they'd been administered better, they could have worked better, these sorts of things. So, and these musings are interesting because, again, it shows that the people, him and the people around him, not that they didn't have their self-serving elements, they did. They weren't perfect people or anything, but they, again, this driving commitment to improve the quality of lives of the British people. Now, some of this, if we go a little bit off sort of the script, some of this was that they were all, along with the Americans, they're all terrified of communism, because in their view at the time, the Soviet state, the communist Soviet state, had been reasonably successful, and they were overestimating its success by quite a long shot. But nonetheless, they thought it's being reasonably successful, far more successful than anybody thought it would be. Now, okay, it was a regime that was controlled by terror and by lies and by propaganda, and which isn't exactly a glowing endorsement, but it was still so. It was still, they feared that the masses, the people, the poorest people in particular, would see communism as a viable alternative, and the Soviet constitution was to assist, materially and directly assist, any communist revolution anywhere in the world. So it was an uprising in, for example, Britain. Then the fear was that the Soviet communists would support it with whatever means they could, maybe weapons or anything. So this was also a consideration. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, then that fear went along with it. And it was around that time, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that the globalists moved into that, if you like, that ideological power vacuum. So some of this desire to improve the lives of the British citizens was surely altruistic. I want the better for my fellow citizens, but also there was this element of this omnipresent noise at the side of, we better make sure we improve their lives, and better make sure that they're happier, that the citizenry. Otherwise, they might see communism as an alternative, and that's too terrible to think about. So there was that as well. That needs to be baked into the consideration pie here. But Macmillan was talking about, how do you improve people's lives? What do you just give them handouts? Well, no, he didn't see that. He said you have to improve infrastructure, such as access to hospitals and roads and so on. He foresaw that there would be overuse of health facilities because it was a national health scheme, and dental care. He figured that would all be overused because it was free and easily accessible. So there was always that sort of there, and he had considered that, and did perceive that there would be a time when there would have to be co-payments made to be a disincentive for people just to waste their time. Particularly things like war widows, and they've got no man, they've got nothing. They've been given a government house, but they've got almost no interaction with people, so they want to go to someone who's like a doctor, who's an official, and who's got some sort of perceived power, and that person's going to make a fuss of them, and so they take up the doctor's time in just wanting attention and fussing rather than any genuine medical need. And Macmillan and the people around did foresee that possibility, although probably didn't foresee its scale in the years to come. But he thought, okay, we've got to reduce the cost of, like, people have got to be able to buy a house. They've got to be able to, rent has to be affordable, food has to be affordable, electricity has to be affordable, all these sorts of things. And this was going to be standard of living stuff, which is basic 101 standard of living. You can afford to pay for all your essentials and have some sort of surplus left over. And this was very much on their minds. So when it came to it, he looked at well, we've got to improve the roads. We need to provide, better quality electricity. So he went through all those basics. But in the end, the only way we can really do this is to reduce the price of the essentials and the basics in life, such as food. And he also wanted people to have access to consumer goods, motor vehicles, and refrigerators, and home electronics, that sort of stuff. And so he was talking about, or was writing about these things, and they were being raised in cabinet meetings. And he came to the view, he started giving direct subsidies to industry. And he said, I give them, they say they want more money to help with this, so I give them that money. Then they say they want better roads and better transport so they can get workers to work on time and have access to the workforce. So we did that. Then they say they want factories to be built in areas where there's high unemployment so they can get lower cost labour, and they want subsidies to build a factory. And so we gave them that. And we give them all these things, but for some reason, the price of the goods doesn't fall. In spite of all the taxpayer money, nothing really improves. So, and this was an interesting comment, that the only way we can get better quality goods at a lower price is through making sure there's market competition. We've got to stop sort of all cartels, oligopolies, monopolies. We've got to stop the banks having common ownership of all companies within an industry sector. So he identified all the things, well, not just Macmillan, the people around him, and also the senior public servants at the time. They too were committed. Now, they had lifetime guaranteed employment on good salary, so they could afford, I suppose, to look on the less fortunate with a kindly eye. But there was this commitment that what must we do to improve the standard of living of the people? We have to do that. That is our mission. What must we do? So they were looking at all sorts of different policy prescriptions and, okay, what if we did this? Well, how about we do that? And looking at these things again to improve the quality of life, or the standard of living rather. And so competition was the thing that Macmillan realised, and again his government, that we have to ensure there's competition. Only when there is serious, real market competition do the companies improve. And Macmillan nailed it back in the time. He said, look, when there's a lot of competition, in order to win, you have to be the best. You've got to produce the best products at the best price and the best service and the best this, the best that, the best so-and-so. And so that was prescription. But he said, as soon as they're relieved of that burden of competition, they immediately turn to slackness and laziness, profiteering, corruption, and feather bedding, and so on. And then when their profits become easy, and so then the trade unions move in and say, well, we want a bigger piece of that pie for our workers. And then there's industrial havoc and mayhem, and so on. So Macmillan was across of all of this at the time. I'm not singling him out uniquely, but rather singling out that time in history. And so that's what he came down to, that market competition, if it's the government needs to make sure there is lots of competition in the marketplace, and that is going to make the best product at the best price be available to the consumers, and it'll create the best quality management, the most prudent financial management, and so on and so forth. And the best training, because if you want the best people, you got to train them up. So and so it has a virtuous cycle and circle effect on all of industry. Macmillan sort of argued, and this will improve everyone's standard of living. And I think he was right, and especially given now we're working in the opposite sort of side of where the standard of living of the people is irrelevant. As long as you're doing something for black lesbians, then that's it. Hey, we've done that. Equity. Who gives a stuff about the rest of it? So we've gone an actual reverse there. So on a trajectory of very efficient productivity, efficiency of output, quality of management, all these sort of things, it's gone into absolute reverse from what would have been a high point around the 1970s or early 1970s. So now let's look at sort of quality of life. That's standard of living. Now, quality of life, standard of living can intersect. For example, standard of living means you've got access to good medical care. That's also a quality of life issue. So, standard of living is that you can use good quality roads. That's also a quality of life issue in a number of ways. But say quality of life in the sense of, and it's relative. For example, I can't go and eat every night for the rest of my life, or every day for the rest of my life, at Sydney's most expensive restaurant. I couldn't afford it. Even the breakfast is $200 a head. So I couldn't afford to do that for the rest of my life. But does that mean my standard of living is poor? Does that mean I don't have a quality of life? So there's a certain relativity of that. I can look out my back windows. I'm doing that. I'm looking at my back window. I'm right on the edge of a national park, so all I can see is trees and critters and birds and whatnot. And I wake up in the morning, all I hear is the noise of birds twittering. So hey, that's good quality of life, is it? Is it a standard living thing? Well, no, it's a quality of life thing, and you can juggle the two and say, well, I get quality of life here, but not standard living necessarily. The fact I can listen to birds twittering in the morning when I wake up doesn't mean I've got higher income suddenly, or so. But to come back to this issue of standard living, that the British government at the time and following World War II was very committed to this idea of improving standard of living and taking whatever action. And I think the prescription of ensuring maximum market competition is not something that any big organisation wants. They want monopolies because that makes profit easy. Once you've got a very easy time of making money, then the patronage system can kick in, and you can appoint your buddies and your wastrel nephews into prestigious sort of roles, which is the sort of thing we have today. In fact, instead of productivity today, as in business productivity, we've got ideological productivity. Can you convince enough of people that globalization is a good thing, because then you'll have a well-paid job? So that's something I wanted to cover there, this idea of standard of living and the things that are required to get it. No government in the West today, certainly that I can see, has any commitment whatsoever to what is needed to produce and create an improving standard of living. I would argue the opposite. You've been a Tacitus today. You're a pushback channel. Thank you for listening.